We are here today to have this insightful interview. I am Katja Ujčič. I am now sitting here in Slovenia talking to our dear Patricia Susan Jackson from British Columbia, Canada. I am Katja Ujčič. I help and guide gifted individuals with exceptional abilities, gifted children, gifted adults, and I also see myself as an ambassador for the gifted. And today I'm thrilled to be together with all of you, of course, and that I have the opportunity to be also with our dear Sue Jackson. Our guest that some of you maybe already know. I'm certain that there are some individuals here that already know Sue and have been positively impacted by her, maybe during either through her therapeutic work or maybe through her insightful thoughts about the giftedness. So, warmly welcome Patricia Susan Jackson, the founder of the Institute for Gifted from British Columbia. She is the world's few psychotherapists specializing in gifted, working with gifted people, working with intense individuals. With almost 30 years of experience, Patricia Susan Jackson has developed her own model to work with gifted people. She will tell us more about it later on. To help gifted individuals harness their unique strengths first, and also effectively navigate the intensity of their thoughts and emotions. So, again, welcome to today's interview, Sue.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here all the way from the west coast of Canada, and maybe some individuals in our audience have been here. It's a glorious part of the world, as is Slovenia. I'm very excited to be coming to Slovenia, and when I was approached about this, I sat out on my deck with my laptop and my husband, and I said, oh, should I take this opportunity? And we looked at the slides and the architecture and the topography, just the sense of the people. I was like, oh, we have to do this. So I'm very happy to be with you, Katja, today, and all the folks in Slovenia. And as my work is literally on pretty much every continent, all of the folks that are out there today, hello and a warm welcome, whatever time of the day it is. I'm delighted to be here.
Yes, great. We already have some our viewers. Hi, Helena, and hi, Mika. So they are both coming to our event soon. So you will know them. I think that maybe you already. Yes. So let's start with the first question, Sue, and then we will talk also later on about this event. Yeah. So today's interview, basically, the theme is changing the harmful myths of giftedness, which is very significant, especially in this era of mental health awareness. So you, as a psychotherapist for gifted, I also help and guide gifted. We know how very important it is basically to know what really giftedness is. So how would you define giftedness?
Well, thank you. I also want to stress for all of the participants that I am an educational consultant by training as well, and I have spent many years in the school systems, both here in Canada and then consulting with school systems literally all over the world. And one day I can be in, more recently I was in Israel, and then I was in Italy, and then I was in Germany, and I was in the Netherlands. And most of the work on that particular day was around helping young children and adolescents and people in college and beyond, of various ages, of course, helping them align with what form of education would be best for someone with this beautiful, beautiful experience of being gifted. And so when I heard Katja was going to approach it from refuting myths, I was so excited because regrettably, every meeting that I have online, almost without a doubt, involves me having to spend a good 10 to 15 minutes establishing a baseline of what giftedness is and why we need to approach it differently. So giftedness it's a biologically rooted concept, and it labels high intelligence, like high intellectual ability, and also something we call extraordinary talent. So they are folks who are born with incredible intellectual abilities, incredibly complex cognition, and extraordinary talent or talents. And it's indicated by advanced and accelerated functions actually within the brain. I will be speaking at the National Association for Gifted Children in November of 2023 on a panel with a good friend of mine who's a neuroscientist and other people talking about what are all the ways that we can look at giftedness. So folks born with this advanced function within the brain, it affects them in all ways, both the sensory, like a heightened what we call sensoria, or all the different ways we take in information and process information. It's much more heightened, much more accelerated, much more complex. It affects emotions. The emotions that occur for gifted people throughout their lives are large and deep and wide and nuanced. So quite opposite to what people think about the intellectual genius who is just thinking from an intellectual, non-emotive point of view. It's quite the opposite. And actually that stereotype, comes from, I think, a very unfortunate occurrence when young gifted children enter school systems or recreational events or whatever, and their sensitivities are so great and so high, and they don't realize they're unique that way because they've only had experience to their own internal world, and the teachers don't know because they're not trained, and so injury can happen really, really early on. And so the little gifted kid, instead of having this beautiful branches and leaves and fruit of their emotions, begins to shut it all down, and we get a very sort of shut down presentation, and then we mistakenly think gifted people are these intellectual people who never express an emotion, and it's quite the opposite. We also are born with incredibly strong intuition, that so-called sixth sense. Sometimes I know for myself, I'll know things just upon meeting people at my clinic, for instance, and the kids will be shocked, how did you know that? And sometimes it will be that my acuity with pattern making is extremely high, so it might have been 7 non-verbal or meta-language things that occurred, and I can put it together to form a pattern. So it's a high level of patterning occurs for gifted, and it may just be intuition where I will know something out of nowhere. This is very, very common. I actually wrote a post about this yesterday where I talked about Einstein and his thought experiments, where he would literally get a feeling in his body and then pictures, like images, and one time spent 10 years thinking about one picture. Well, his intuition derived all of the pieces that would contribute to his general theory of relativity. So it came from a place of intuition and deep thought. I think the next part of my definition of giftedness, so it's this, it affects the cognitive to review the emotional, the physical, the intuitive, the spiritual. It affects all parts of who we are. But it can be enhanced or inhibited by our environments. So it's this genetic pattern of the individual, and then it's our interactions in the environment. And I have a book coming out, hopefully in 2023, and one chapter is looking at what little profoundly gifted infants are like from the moment of birth. And I've been collecting research, and we know that they are literally born like wide-eyed, patterning, aware, processing, responding to touch, responding to tone, much more so than the average little infant. And so, in fact, my research is saying that some of their abilities at birth, the second of birth, are the same as a 3-month-old or a 4-month-old. patting him, and he patted me back in his first couple of minutes of life. So they're born with quite uncommon reactions, quite precocious, highly developed reactions.
Yes. So, listening to you like that, I think it's so profound for me that you mentioned intuition, and because there's not a lot of connection with giftedness and intuition, and basically you did this connection now. So I'm very glad that you said this out loud. Yeah. Also, I would like to stress what you said. Yeah. That this perception of being gifted as exceptional talent, cognitive, cognitive, artistic, musical, physical, it's some sort of privileged, from maybe the other people. Yeah. And what misconceptions can be associated with this perspective, or why this is problematic for gifted population?
Oh my gosh, I will have to watch my own complex emotions when you ask that question, because immediately my touchstone for my work is the literally thousands, over 70,000 hours I have spent with gifted individuals, ranging from, I didn't say this in my opening, you can have sort of a more moderate expression of giftedness, which is awesome and amazing, and it can kind of move through a spectrum to all the way up to something that we call profoundly gifted. And I'm careful to, when I express those differences, in the same way there's differences in intellectual disabilities, where someone can be profoundly compromised in their intellectual ability, and that can move in the spectrum right up to kind of a normal level of ability. We accept that very readily in the world of developmental delays. We seem much more uncomfortable with accepting that you could have a child with sort of an average level of ability, and then if we're going to use IQ as a marker, which that's a whole complicated set of questions we'll get to later, and we say 130, which is that's a couple of standard deviations from the norm, is gifted, and we move up and up and up. We can get way out on the standard curve into 0.01 of the populace that are what we call profoundly gifted, and their experiences are even more complex and more nuanced than a more mildly gifted child. And it's important to take that into consideration, but it's also important to realize that, in my opinion, it's the first quote in my book, every child has a piece of good news. Every child has an important contribution, an important reason, an important sort of viability in the world. And so if that's the premise, then we move into this idea of why then did we somehow connect, giftedness with elitism. And I think it goes back to almost like, if we look at evolutionary psychology, the sort of smart prehistoric human being would more than likely have a higher chance of surviving. And survival was the name of the game in prehistoric human beings. And so then maybe some comparatives started coming into play, because everybody was trying to survive. In our current world, there's some very interesting anomalies that we just take for granted. In most countries around the world, if we think about the Olympics or various other activities, but we'll pick on athletics for a little bit, we seem much more accepting of profound capacity in the physical world, in sports and athletics. And full disclosure, both of my children were elite athletes, and they experienced a peculiar form of prejudice, that they were both very, very bright, but also elite athletes. We'll get to that perhaps at another time. But by and large, in society, if a child comes into the world and they're extraordinarily gifted with athletics, everyone's like, look at that little Johnny, mythical Johnny, capable of doing all of these things. And suddenly maybe he's offered an opportunity to play on a very advanced sporting team, which the educational system supports or the community supports. No one says profoundly gifted athletic little Johnny should stay with other 7-year-olds and do what they're doing because he's making them uncomfortable with his profound fast twitch muscles and fine abilities. No one thinks of that. They're like, this is great. I'd like to see Johnny play next weekend. What an extraordinary human being, and it could be little Susie, of course. So we're much more comfortable, and we accept that much more readily than we do intellectual or extraordinary talent. And that said, certain extraordinary talents we're more comfortable with. Mathematics is a really good example. If a child in early years, preschool, kindergarten, grade 1, using North American terminology, my apologies, if a child shows proficiency in numbers, teachers seem a little more comfortable with that. Oh, look at John. He's able to do things. Perhaps we should advance the curriculum, and so they're more comfortable with that. Little Susie, who's good with language, first of all, it's hard to demonstrate it because there usually aren't the materials available for that child. They're working with very lower level materials. It's hard to sort of write beyond if you're never exposed to the vocabulary. So she or he would not be sort of recognized. But there is tremendous prejudice against people with inborn gifts. And there's just so many myths. Like, A Nation Deceived was a study done in the U.S. where they proved unequivocally that acceleration is an important opportunity for the intellectually or exceptionally talented child, in the same way the little athlete at 7 who can play with 12-year-olds and shines with true peers. He shines with true peers, where with other little average 7-year-olds, he's disabled. He's kind of handicapped. He can't keep up. We have proven that acceleration for the gifted child is actually a very, very important intervention, and yet there's so many myths out there like, oh, what will happen to them socially? Well, I'll talk about one little boy who is, how old is he? He's 8 years old. I'm being careful to hide some identity issues, although I do have permission to talk about him in a discreet way. He's 8 years old and is teaching himself calculus. So this is something that in Canadian schools you would learn in first year university, maybe at the end of high school. And he's self-taught in calculus. So I had to watch him in a grade 3 class, and I had to sit on the side and make myself small and watch him. And the other little kids were learning numeracy. They were learning addition. And you could see him. I'm sure his mom had said, what will we call him? Felix. Little Felix. When you go today, try to stay calm. Try to pay attention. And they were literally adding up single-digit numbers. And he can teach himself calculus. And yet the school system refuses to accelerate him because they think it will be hard on his well-being. So I wrote on my piece of paper, say at 9:20 on that day, I wrote, I give this 2 minutes before he has an explosion. And I was off by a minute because he was just sitting there trying to contain himself. It would be like taking that athletic kid and tying him up with duct tape and saying, I want you to go out there and enjoy your time with these other kids who have none of your abilities. And he had a little meltdown and he got thrown out of class. And then I get called in to deal with his outrageous behaviors. And he's developmentally primed to learn. All human beings are developmentally primed to learn, right on this edge of where their learning needs to be. And that's what giftedness is all about.
Yeah, so amazing. Yeah, thank you for this wonderful story. Yeah, so the individuals, let's say like Elton John, Tesla, and Einstein, we know that basically, we all know that they are genius. Yeah. Do you think that there are many gifted individuals just walking around and not realizing they are gifted, and they have this potential inside, that their purpose in life that would contribute to the world and to the society, and yet they, slowly become passive, and maybe they also develop certain psychosocial there are many that kind of
Oh,
individuals?
yeah, it's extraordinary. A colleague of mine, Marianne Jacobson, I think is her name, wrote a book about adult giftedness, and I often quote what she said. The gifted individual is just as likely to be the high school dropout as they are the CEO, the politico, the renowned artist, the successful human being. I mean, they're just as likely to be that person. And why is that the case? If I entered the school system, this is my own story actually, I entered the school system reading, writing, doing advanced math. And in Canada at that time, we just had grade 1, there was no kindergarten. And I remember the very first day, they put the letter B on the board, and I remember looking around, and like I was a very shy little girl, very like, do this, yeah, and do as I'm asked to do. And our family, strangely enough, was very intellectual, and so I've been reading and having great discussions my whole life, and I was like, I almost started, and I get very emotional telling the story, I almost started to cry. I'm like, my parents must have got mixed up today when they brought me to school, like, because school was going to be a nirvana, a mecca of incredible opportunities to learn, and the other children are struggling with writing down the letter B. And then I realized, and I remember this as clear as I'm sitting here with you, Katja, today, I realized that I was going to be kind of in trouble because how was I going to, at recess, kind of connect and be with other little kids? Because I wanted to say to them, oh my gosh, this is awful. They've dropped me off at the wrong place. Like, what is happening? We can all read. Why are they doing this? But I realized that wasn't the case. Although, weirdly enough, there were 4 other little kids in the class that were as bright as I was, and I was accelerated very quickly. And I kind of have a good story, but I remember that moment. Now, imagine another little kid, little boy, little girl, in that classroom without the parental backing and without a school that would accelerate us, which they did. By recess of the second day, that child is in dissonance. Like, instead of being lined up and expressing him or herself freely with their intellect and their emotions and their joy of learning and their joy of life, they've got choices. Either they kind of express their discomfort, which is probably not understood by anyone. The Fordham study found that 78% of teachers have zero training in giftedness. Yeah. Zero training. And in fact, there's other studies that show teachers are kind of made to feel, many teachers, not all teachers, but many teachers feel really off-putting because they don't have the training. It would be like, me trying to work with a severely developmentally delayed child. I don't have that training, and I might have all the desire in the world, but I really don't know what to do. And in the case of the gifted child, like the little boy who taught himself calculus, it was clear in that classroom because I spent an hour in there. That teacher wasn't comfortable with mathematics, may or may not have done calculus herself, and certainly can't be expected to teach numeracy to this little table of kids and check on his calculus homework at the other end. So there's like a million reasons why this is sort of a lack of fit situation.
And so there are a lot of gifted individuals. I'm just asking this because, there are like, I'm sure in Canada it's different, in Slovenia it's different of how, how we discover the gifted children. Yeah. So what do you think, what role does testing play? Testing of IQ play in the identifying gifted individuals. So, and how, let's say, would people who feel, that they are gifted, and that they suspect that they are gifted or their children are gifted, how should they recognize and confirm their gifts?
I think the first thing, I'll maybe start with children and remind me if I forget to talk about the adult. But with children, you can go certainly on my website, Damon Institute for the Highly Gifted. Maybe we can post that at the end. There's all kinds of, like a really quick Google search, and you can, find gifted sites like the National Association for Gifted Children site will have pages and pages of descriptions of what a gifted child is like. And those kinds of larger organizations, or folks like myself who have done years and years and years of research, will be careful to put characteristics down that are inclusive. They're inclusive of children of all kinds of social and cultural backgrounds, because that's very, very, very important. Like, I work with a lot of kids, including the little math guy. English is not their first language. His first language is Mandarin, actually. But I work with kids who have all different languages, and you have to be very careful to, like, if you were looking for advanced vocabulary, they may or may not have that in the English, if that's the language that you're studying. Certainly kids, I'm working with a young man now who came from extreme poverty and very unfortunately abuse. He's given me permission to tell his story. So his parents would leave him alone for like a week at a time as an 8-year-old. He was taking care of himself and going to school. And so that child is not going to demonstrate obvious signs. He's not going to be doing calculus on the side of the paper. He's going to be using his intelligence to kind of just survive in a very harmful situation. So you would start with the characteristics of giftedness, but go to a site that is going to take into consideration all of the external factors that will dampen the giftedness or enhance them. Once you've gone to that aspect of it, there are all kinds of organizations in the world, in all countries, that you can test for giftedness using IQ tests. And they're not the be-all and the end-all. Most of them are looking for what we call the G factor, which is this notion of general intelligence. And without getting into a long, boring lecture on psychometrics, most of the standardized IQ tests will let us know about the G factor. But as we've developed our testing acumen, or our understanding more and more, we realize that global IQ score, let's say we'll just go with this 130 marker, 100 being an average IQ, 130 being 2 standard deviations. Maybe the global number is not as important as understanding what the subtests within the larger test reveal, because there can be gifted people who are brilliant beyond description, but they don't process language in a standardized format. So on the language of verbal base, they can do less well, and on the visual spatial, the ability to see patterns, to understand things in space, they can do better. So if you were to average those scores, the lower scores of verbal and the higher scores, then you come out, this child is simply average, and that is an extreme disservice to that child. So that's just one, for instance. So we do have IQ scores, but I recommend, as do most professionals in the field, portfolio evidence of giftedness. Yeah. So you're going to look at those characteristics of giftedness: heightened sensitivity, a strong sense of justice, the ability to see patterns very quickly, strong memory. There's lists and lists of characteristics, but you're also going to look for evidence of children that stay with a subject for a long time, or demonstrate really high curiosity, and maybe the initiative to pursue things on their own. So your gifted kid could be the kid I actually worked with this guy. He was just ticking off all the teachers in class, and so he eventually took thread and built a spider web around himself one day that was extremely intricate. And so they were like, this kid is just terrible, and he doesn't have a very high intelligence. What it was he had severe language disorder and very high visual spatial ability, and he was very frustrated in class, and he thought there was something wrong with him, because school systems by and large really praise and reinforce the language-based kid and the numeracy-based kid first. And what they should have seen was that spiderweb that he built demonstrated remarkable talent, and we needed to investigate that further. So IQ testing should be part of a portfolio approach. You should interview parents. Parents often have a sense, hey, this kid's a little different. This kid is, even from, as I was saying, at birth, you'll notice that sort of bright eye contact, early language, parents, be sure to tap into my site or one of the big sites and just have a look at characteristics of giftedness and see whether you want to pursue or start collecting artifacts. One of our children is an artist, a professional artist, and how she showed this profound artistry was very, very young as a toddler. If we took her out, she would pick things up off the ground. They were like, what is she doing? And whatever it was, she would insist on bringing it home, and she would go off by herself, and she would make these creations out of found garbage. And so I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And it wasn't until she was about, I think it was 3 or 4, she picked up a pencil one day and drew a perfect self-portrait, like shocking. But the early signs were kind of veiled or hidden. But I had a sense of it. I was like, this is really important to her. So again, in terms of identification, it's important to pay close attention to your children and really do your investigation. As adults, if you're an adult listening and you're wondering where you fit in, I wrote an article on a site called Medium, and it was called My Thoughts on What It Means to Be a Gifted Adult and How It Might Help You. And it's kind of just a running kind of narrative about the sort of plus minus of being a gifted adult, but not really knowing you're a gifted adult. And it's had a lot of traction and really helped a lot of people. The Gifted Development Center in Colorado also has some really nice markers for gifted adults. And I'm sure, Katja, on your site, you have the same.
Yeah, of course, yes.
Yeah.
And also in English side, yes. But
yeah.
Sometimes it's like with my clients, I can see it's so hard for them. Nevertheless, the portfolio, let's say, it's there. It's so hard to embrace these gifts, and to say, okay, I am gifted. For me, it takes, also like in private, as my mentor and my therapist. So in my, it takes in my case, it took years, but nevertheless, also now for me, it's like I can say it far more easily, but there are moments that I am like, there are these moments. It's not 100%, and I understand all my clients that are also saying the same, like, no, how do you explain that? It's such a in a way weird concept, but at the same time it's in them, they are just in this giftedness, so how would you say how to start for those people to embrace this gift and giftedness? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I think that's a really challenging notion, and it gets into the whole sort of political philosophy behind mental health concepts and behind educational concepps, and this notion of envy. A colleague of mine wrote a brilliant piece on envy, and going back to when I was a little kid, I knew that I was in trouble for another reason too, because if these other kids were struggling to get the basics, and I already came in like doing that, and their whole purpose was to learn all of that. It was like we were running a mile, and I started off having already run, 500 meters ahead of them or more, and so I knew that was going to be a problem, and I had to really think about that.
It's like embracing gifts. Like, how would you recommend to help themselves as embracing, in terms of self-awareness and self-confidence? This is very, very difficult, I found. Yeah, of course, it's the envy from others, so we are going to hide because we don't want to experience this. It's very, very, very difficult. But also for ourselves, it's a concept that it's in one way so familiar, but at the same time so strange. It's so difficult then to embrace that for people.
What I ask people to do is once they've been exposed to this notion of giftedness, I tell them that it's like going as you say, there's going to be all kinds of competing emotions. Like nowadays, it's almost more acceptable to say that you have something like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, or some other mental health category. It's almost easier, like there's this notion of neurodivergence. It's almost easier to talk about a neurodivergent thing, that there's nothing wrong with having ADHD and people have it, but that's almost easier to accept than saying, I'm profoundly gifted and I have an exceptionally high IQ, high intuition, and nuanced emotional field. It's like, whoa, how did that happen? So I want people to start with really taking care of themselves. The second one is like a meditative practice of some kind. So if you just found out on your giftedness, the one thing you can do for yourself out of the gates is to have like 3 minutes every day where you just sit and be with yourself in a new way. Because there's going to be all kinds of interesting emotions happening. And if you can start to develop this little quiet voice inside of you that it will be all right, it's as it should be, I am enough. So concepts to start a new kind of language. So me as that little 5-year-old or 6-year-old, like I don't know if I did this, I'm not sure if I did, I think I was scared. But if I could have had my own advice, it would have been, you'll be all right. You'll be all right. Like, your development is as it should be. There's a certain purpose in who you are. And then the next point would be, learn everything you can about giftedness. And as an adult gifted person, obviously, Katja's doing brilliant work in that field. There's a group called Intergifted in Switzerland, a friend of ours running nice work out of that. So go into the sites, wherever you are in the world, and learn everything you can about giftedness. But like, it would almost be like a really nice glass of very nice wine. You don't want to sit down and with a straw and drink it all at once. Like, just take a few sips and put it aside, and sit with it. And again, we've got that practice in place where you're going to sit with yourself and you're going to take care of yourself. So that would be the next thing. If you're someone that likes language, I would suggest you start journaling. And again, don't make it into too big of a project. Just maybe a couple of minutes a day, stream of consciousness. Or if you're an artsy kind of person, maybe little symbols or drawings or figures. If you're a building kind of person like my husband, just maybe have a project that you're going to work on, but have a way to kind of express what's happening inside of you out in the world. That would be the next step. My next step after all of that, when you're incorporating all of these new ideas about yourself and taking care of yourself, is decide whether there may be new ways of doing things that are going to be more appropriate with your giftedness. Like, even one of the new ways of doing things is you may begin to accept your intuitive ideas, and instead of like, oh, where'd that come from? Like, it's like, there's something in that. I'm going to sit with that. I'm going to honor my intuition. Or it might be recognizing that you need a higher amount of sleep every day to allow yourself to process all of these complex emotions. I teach my little kids, you don't get this amazing mind without a little bit of responsibility to take care of it in different ways. And they get really excited by that. They're like, wow. And then I also teach my little kids that this amazing mind that can have been traumatized or injured in some way has the same capacity to problem solve, has the same extraordinary capacity to intuit, the same extraordinary capacity to be curious. And you can help yourself with guidance come out of those more difficult mental health places. I really encourage people to start gradually with lots of self-encouragement. And obviously I've stressed that a lot, but it's very, very important, because you may have had a lot of messages that have said, you're too intense, you're too curious, you're quote-unquote too much, or in some cases, you seem silly, your reaction seems silly, or we didn't want that much of an explanation for something relatively simple to the other folks. So your whole life you may have been kind of out of sync with the environments around you, and now we're saying we need to find environments that you can be in sync, and that leads me to my next point. I do recommend, if you can, that you get a therapist that understands it, or a coach, or that you join an online gifted group. Feel free sort of self-help as it is more just daily, like almost like a daily meditation or a daily idea about giftedness. And I try to be very inclusive with my commentary and joining Katja's site or what she's doing, Intergifted, all of these various groups. Lottie Van Leith, if you're from Germany, is doing a very nice job also with gifted adults. And then there are conferences, and that leads me to the conference that we're doing coming up in Slovenia, which I'm so excited. And when I do a keynote at a conference, I love to be that person who will sit down with you on a park bench and just talk. Like, I don't want to be up at the podium like a talking head kind of a human being. I love to meet people. Katja's also extremely welcoming and warm and quick to include people. So, you are 100%. So, if it's a possibility that you can come to our conference, and I'll leave that to Katja to give the details on that. I also encourage you to do things in sort of deep interests, because it doesn't have to be labeled gifted, but maybe in accepting your curiosities. Our artist daughter is very interested in astronomy, and so recently joined some group at one of our local universities to stargaze and be with all the astrophysicists. And I'm sure she brings a lively and new perspective to that group as well. So go with your special interests, because you may find like-minded people. Because basically one of the ways to kind of come into your giftedness is to kind of lean into Rumi, who's a poet and philosopher, said, "Let the beauty you love be what you do." And that was one of my guiding points for a long time. And I was so curious about the human mind and the human condition. And so I started, I think, studying that very, very early in life. Let the beauty you love be what you do. That will help lead us out into the world, and at the same point in time bring us back to ourselves. And then finally, my last point on sort of discovering your own giftedness is once in a while ask yourself the big questions, the big existential questions. What does my unique pattern of awarenesses and talents, how can it play in the world? How can it be in the world? In the smallest of ways or in the biggest and grandest of ways? And I stress this very much in my work. That young man that I'm working with that came from a very disadvantaged background, very unfortunately, he developed a drug habit that was very serious. And so now I'm working with him, bringing him back through into a functioning without the drugs. And then when I said, what could you do in the world? He was like, what do you mean? I'm just transcribed. I said, no, it could be something very, very simple. And I'll give one concrete example. One of my boys is Chinese, and during COVID, he decided that senior people that were in seniors' homes, so the elderly, were going to be very shut off and shut down. So this beautiful, handsome, he does Boy Scouts, put on his Boy Scout uniform and went online the way we are today and sang happy birthday. He's got this incredible voice. And so he would call up the seniors' homes in the area he lived and find out, Mrs. Smith and Mr. Jones and someone else all had birthdays, and he would sing individually to them happy birthday. And so it would take 10 minutes out of his day, and it sounds kind of, I don't know what it sounds like. It sounds joyous to me, but I saw a huge growth in his acceptance of his own giftedness as he participated in the human commons, in a new way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, how nice. So thank you for all this advice. It's very, very good. Yeah. So with your extensive work with gifted individuals worldwide, what would you say the giftedness actually is? Is the stream of energy? Is these multidimensional energies, maybe phenomenons, or it's some intensive focus on one area? And where is spiritual dimension here in giftedness?
Okay. My model that I designed, I think it was 25 years ago, is called Integral Practice for the Gifted. And it springs from a body of work called integral psychology, which if you're a professional, it's considered the fifth wave of psychology. It's like post-humanistic psychology, and then we move into integral. And as the word suggests, it's like a highly integrated way of looking at human behavior. So I took the work of Ken Wilber, and then I began there and studied it extensively, and then customized it for the gifted experience. So to me, giftedness is a spectrum of consciousness. So what happens, let's go back to those little infants that are born, and you should see the research I have on this. These little infants, like, so another little infant was born, say, the same day as my son, and upon birth, didn't hold his head up. Kind of a more average experience for an infant, joyously received by his parents and everyone there, but a very different experience, where the little, very gifted infant, looking people in the eyes from the moment of birth, attempting to communicate, patting the mama on the back, attempting to talk to the other babies, like looking at them like this. Okay, so that child's consciousness is a very advanced consciousness. Like in cognitive abilities, it's like a 3-month-old from the moment of birth. So if that child is supported throughout their life and doesn't get thwarted by a system that's like, well, Johnny, well, you can read. We don't want to have the other children feel bad, so you can just be quiet while we're learning reading. If that child is not thwarted, think of that beginning part. They're just going to grow and grow, and as we said, it affects their social, their emotional, their communicative, their ability to communicate. Oftentimes in the waiting room of the clinic, you'll hear the most hilarious conversations where, because I work almost exclusively with the profoundly gifted, so the outliers of outliers, and they will do this telegraphic communication where one guy will just say a couple of words, the other guy will interrupt and say a couple of words, and then they'll get all excited because it's almost like they're communicating telepathically, which in some cases they are actually quite capable of doing. But that isn't something spooky science or weird. All it is, if we accept it, it's an acceptance of a spectrum of consciousness. And some little ones are born at a very advanced level of consciousness. At the highest level of consciousness in my model is something called transcendental perspectivism, which I'll kind of break it down really quickly. I'm aware of the time. Basically, it's like these kids at the highest level of consciousness are very aware that they exist in a world with other people, and that the true meaning of our existence is in that connection with other people, or in that connection with the world. We have a scholar here in Canada who's looked at the behavior of trees, and you can look this up, University of British Columbia, and lo and behold, trees have ways of communicating. Through the root system, they'll support a tree that's dying. It's just fascinating stuff. So the little gifted kid is born connected to other people, connected to the world, connected to the spiritual, and they want to contribute, which is why they are so driven to discover, to make better, to improve. But when the system doesn't support that, it can get very thwarted, and it can become very toxic. So it can become about power and using their intelligence for power because they were damaged early on. Giftedness affects our perceptions, our behaviors, our motivation, our aspirations, our instincts, the depth and breadth of our emotional awareness. We have a very dynamic way of thinking. We have strong internal drive to learn new, novelty, and all of those things. So giftedness, as you can see by my model, is a real spectrum of consciousness. And again, go back to the opening page of my book to come, and that every child has a piece of good news. Every child has intelligences and a spirit, and we must accept and support all children, but no less so the very gifted or the gifted in general.
Yes, so very nice. Thank you very much. So, as you know, you can also ask some questions to Sue. We still have spot on, Sue. Yeah, I think Miko was referring to the spectrum of consciousness. Yes, for sure. And thank you, exactly, also for Sue, to you for acknowledging that. For sure, I think that many of us who are gifted, we feel that, and basically just waiting for someone who is a lead expert to say that. Yeah, and it's a big confirmation for all of us. I'm sure I agree with that also. So if you have any question to Sue, please feel free to ask her. Put question here in the chat. I will read it. So looking ahead, Sue, what are your aspirations for the future of gifted individuals and the communities that support them? So in Slovenia, we don't have that supportive group. I'm trying to organize one. It's still very difficult because it's a very, very new thing in Slovenia. But nevertheless, what is the inspiration for the future of gifted individuals and the communities? What would you say?
Oh gosh, I'm trying to take care of myself so well so I can live to be 150, because there's a lot of work to do. I think that it's almost like the Declaration of Rights of Children under the UN banner, that no child should go without water, no child should go without sustenance, nutrition, no child should live in fear, and so on and so forth. I feel like no gifted child, go back to those little infants, no gifted child should be thwarted or depressed or not given opportunities from the very beginning. Because so often, and I did begin my career with this because I ran into a boy that was profoundly gifted and profoundly depressed. And I consider myself fairly good at relating and connecting to people, and I found him very shut down, and I thought that should never happen. Such beauty, such elegance of thinking, such elegance of consciousness should never end up in a depressed spot. But what happened to him is when he went into kindergarten, they're like, oh, what a bright child, he's reading and writing, and like me, he was accelerated and accelerated again. And then they pulled the gifted program. There was no more gifted programming when he hit grade 5. So then he was now expected to sit in the classroom and not progress whatsoever. And giftedness was now a bad word because we needed to put all the money towards children who had maybe a developmental delay, which of course those children should be supported. Who would ever think otherwise? That would be really awful on the part of humanity. But so is it awful on the part of humanity to not allow provisions for acceleration, to allow provisions for excellent mentoring for these children. One of my guys, I can't see where he is in the world, but one of the countries, he was telling me about this guy that he gets to hang out with at the university. My child that I work with is 10, and he's taking a course at the university. We also have him doing courses that are a little more age appropriate. We've got him on an integrated program. And I go, this guy sounds amazing. And as this 11-year-old's telling me about this, I'm thinking, oh, I wonder what this guy's like. He's probably like a PhD student, maybe 28, 29, something like that. It turns out he's like 91 years old. Right? Oh, wow. And he's this brilliant guy. And my 11-year-old he considers him the most amazing friend and peer, because he's a true peer. Like, not an age peer, but a true peer. And as you know, Katja, age just disappears when you get to be, age just disappears when you get to be with someone who really kind of gets it. Even today, I hope you're picking up on Katja's beautiful energy, and hopefully I'm transmitting that as well. So if you're out there today, I hope you can feel that, because regardless of language or culture or where we are in the world economically or occupationally, there's a similarity. So I hope to connect, to be a part of a force to connect people around the world, and I hope to be a huge force to remove the barriers for children in education and in mental health. I can't even, at 9:57 here on the West Coast, I can't even begin to get into that, but I do want to not leave without saying that differential diagnosis for mental health challenges is essential for giftedness. Because without an understanding that it is natural for me to have incredibly high energy. I've been up since 4:30. I have worked out. I have gone for a walk. I got natural for me to have this incredibly high energy. And were someone not to know that, they might follow me around for a day and decide that maybe that isn't a positive energy, that maybe it should be defined differently. Similarly, a strong imagination in a profoundly gifted kid could be seen as a disassociative kind of experience. Yeah. It's not to say that there aren't kids who do have, as I say, ADHD. Of course there are, or that kids can't disassociate. But unless you understand the baseline, you have no business deciding what is off base. Just because it's uncommon doesn't mean it isn't normal.
Wow, this is a wonderful, wonderful point you just put out there. Yes, I think it's very important that it's like at the beginning, basically. Huh? Yeah. So, yes, Robin is saying, hi Sue and hi Katja. This interview gave similar feelings as watching Rise.
Oh my goodness, really? Oh.
Thank you, Robin. It was great this time. So thank you very much, Robin, for listening. Yeah, we are closely to the end. I just have one question, and then we will just talk a little bit about our event, just a few more minutes. So Katja is asking from Slovenia, Katja Ujčič, why is so important for us humans to express what we have inside? Why we are so unhappy if we don't do that?
Oh my gosh, Katja, I hope I get to meet you.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
I can. Oh yeah, no, because I could have coffee with you and discuss this for 4 hours. Is my point. And it brings me to tears. I believe, as every person on the planet has a piece of good news, I believe that we're all born with a daemon, which is why I called my institute the Daemon Institute, which comes from Socrates. And look it up, D-A-I-M-O-N. It's a fascinating concept. But I believe we're all born with like a template. Every individual comes into the world with a template. So all those little babies that were born the same day my son was born, regardless of gifted or not, they all come with a template, a way they should be in the world, a way they can express their intelligences, their emotions, their spirituality, their physical. And when we are running in line with the template, things just continue to evolve. So as a little girl, I was very, I guess, fortunate to be born with a high linguistic intelligence and a love of poetry. And to this day, if I leave that too long, and my son challenged me on this yesterday, he goes, Mom, I don't think you're reading enough these days. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm running an international business. Because reading for me and writing poetry is in line with my blueprint. So my spiritual blueprint needs to be built according to how it was designed. When it is not given that opportunity, that's the very definition of anxiety and depression. The very definition of anxiety comes from not being able to express that kernel of good news, as I say, that blueprint of who you are as a human being. That's when we start to feel like off, not put together, worried, concerned. And when you help people bring them more and more into who they are, it's like the sort of mental health stuff starts to dissolve. And it's not to say that there aren't tremendously complex mental health presentations that need appropriate support and whatever's needed. But by and large, if we're running in line with our daemon, our core, and how do we know about what our daemon is? Again, the things we are drawn to, let the beauty we love be what we do, the things we are drawn to, the things we're curious about. The adults that, your child, the adults that you're, oh, I loved it when you had a party and Miss Smith came over. She was fascinating to me. Who is that person? Can I spend more time around them?
Yeah. So thank you again for acknowledging this. The blueprint and the daemon is so important. I think that it's like once we are realizing that, it's like it's a new me, basically. Yeah, not more authentic. Yeah, it's like completely different world. Basically, happened also to me when I met you and we started to work together. It's like
we may not be seen really clearly in families. There's a really brief note. I know we're out of time. And it's not the fault of, a visually impaired parent or whatever, spiritually impaired parent. It's just that the parent can only sort of see what they're capable of seeing. And so oftentimes you will have a gifted individual in a family with extraordinary abilities or insight or emotional complexity, an appetite for learning in a home where that's not encouraged. So the gifted child, because they're sensitive, they will try to provide the feedback the parent is asking for. And so instead of growing like a tree, strong and true, they're now starting to grow like this. So their template is now becoming skewed. And so some of the work of working with gifted adults that I love to do, and I have such a heart for what this feels like, is when you haven't been encouraged according to what your template is. And for all the parents out there, I know you're doing the very best job you can. That's not a criticism. Raising gifted children and being a gifted adult is incredible and beautiful, but it is complex.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's a lot of time like that, so that the gifted child is then in that kind of family. And I usually say, you are like Picasso picture then, it's not the whole person, but it's, as you said, it goes like that, you really are forced to become something else, someone else, like that, So thank you very much for all who are here with us and listening to us and saying hi. Also, Robin and Maurice, I think I pronounced this correctly. Yes, Helena, Mika, Katja, and all the rest. So, saying to you all hi. Please leave us a little bit of heart or like, and a few last sentences. So let's talk about you will come to Slovenia, to Ljubljana in the beginning of June, on the 8th and 9th of June. We are hosting Sue in Ljubljana. It's for the first time that kind of leading expert for giftedness in Slovenia. So it's really, really important for all of you gifted individuals, those who don't think they're gifted, but they find themselves now listening to the Sue, the adults, the parents of gifted children, the teachers, the social workers, the psychologists, the HR managers, people who really work with gifted population, and maybe they want to know more about that, So there are a lot of people who really needs to come to listen to the Sue. You are going to talk about, can you give us a sneak peek into your topics? So
Sure. I have one talk that is really a celebration of giftedness, and because I have been working for many, many years, it will look at everything from identification to what the spectrum of consciousness is, to what our experiences are where we're supported, and then things like differential diagnosis when we haven't been supported. But overall, the integral practice for the gifted is an aspirational model. It says that because we were born with, as I said at the beginning, this complex brain and sensorium that is unique, we can also heal better than anyone else. So I think that's important to know. I'm giving a talk also on entrepreneurial giftedness, and I talked briefly about the fact we have two now adult children who both happen to be entrepreneurs on the world stage. And I don't even know. I feel like as a mom, I fell down a rabbit hole backwards or something. But I am an entrepreneur myself, completely self-taught, and my son has an MBA and my daughter is completely self-taught. But it's dear, dear, dear to my heart, because I think in a world where the world problem is deep, as we look at it, the geopolitical issues, the environmental challenges, the clash of cultures, the loss of hope in our sense of spirit and purpose, I think entrepreneurs have a huge role to play in sort of an ethical orientation to how they can participate in the world in creating services and products and opportunities. Oh, I could talk all day about this, and I guess I get to when I come to but I'll be talking about entrepreneurial giftedness, which I haven't studied for quite some time. As I started to kind of clue in that even though my kids had all these advanced degrees, that that's where they were heading, I thought, oh, I better get on that and understand that fully. So I'll be talking about that, and I'll be talking about adult giftedness. I'll be talking about how we support children in schools, and I have a strong educational background. It's very important to know that as well.
Yes. So, dear listeners, now listening here live and later on, entrepreneurial giftedness, intelligence is very, very important. So it's basically the pioneering with these topics here in Slovenia. And Sue is the expert here. So those who are businessmen, businesswomen, who want to have their own business or they are just lost in this business world, I'm sure you will be much, much inspired here with what Sue has to say. Yeah. And then the second part is on the 9th of June is about discovering and understanding of giftedness. So as Sue said, we are going to talk about giftedness, discovering giftedness, and then later on also Sue is going to talk about 27 strategies. So yes, you heard right, 27 strategies how to help gifted child. So this is so important for parents, even if they even don't know if the child is gifted or not. I'm sure they will find at least one strategy that will help. So 27 strategies how to help children. And later on, we are going to have also a talk with an interview with me and with Sue on the same. So we will speak a little bit about ourselves and our, of course, about giftedness and so on. So it will be even more interactive with you, so you can speak with Sue. So also later on, we will have a little bit of coffee break and reception in the end. So we will mingle and talk. So, but nevertheless, as Sue said in the beginning, it will be very, very inspiring for you. As you can feel Sue's energy, she's fantastic. I can say I worked with her for so long, and every time I think she just put me into my place where I'm back in my roots, and just with talking to her. So warmly welcome all. Please join us on this fantastic event, and I hope all to see you there. And for you, Sue, thank you very much for today's interview. We are past our time, but it was so interesting. And again, thank you very much. Warm hello to and greetings to Canada, and see you in Slovenia.
Thank you so much, Katja. You're, as always, most gracious and insightful host. And I'm so looking forward to being there. I wish my husband could come along, but hopefully next year his health will be a little better. So, and I look forward to meeting you, whether you're coming from England or Italy or Slovenia or the Netherlands, to name a few countries I know that are already represented. And I do promise I'm very accessible, so I look forward to seeing you all.
Yes, this is internationally. Yes, this is international event. Exactly. We have a lot of coming from, who knows Sue, coming from abroad. So thank you so